Hello, good evening. This is St. Clements in Ewell, and I'm Father Alexander, and this is the A to Z of Catholicism, and we've arrived at S. S is for the saints. Now, I thought this was a very good topic. I really do think this is something that a most important topic. Why are there so many saints? And nobody knows how many saints there are. There are hundreds of thousands of saints. There are canonized saints, the people who have been declared saints by the church, but then there are all the people who, before the church started canonizing saints, who emerged as saints through popular devotion. Why are there so many saints? One of the reasons why there are so many saints is because John Paul II, who himself is now a saint, um, seemingly or allegedly, or people say, canonized more saints than all his predecessors put together. That's one of the reasons why we have so many saints. And it used to be the case, if you remember, that quite a lot of days were ferial days. In other words, no saint was celebrated. Now there's virtually a saint every day of the week. Now, why did John Paul II do this? Well, he did it. The rationale was that people need examples, and people need examples that will speak to modern people. And therefore, we need constant examples, constant new examples to show us how to live the gospel in modern life. And that was the rationale provided by John Paul II, not him specifically, but the people around him. I think that that's broadly true, but I'd like to take it one further, and I would say that when you're trying to argue about religion with people using abstracts, using abstract nouns, talking about faith and things like that, it's very difficult because people don't really like talking about abstractions. But if you could talk about, say, if you talk about holiness, they don't really know what you're talking about. But if you give an example of holiness, a practical, lived life of holiness, what it means to be a person of faith, that is an easier way to argue. The other thing is this, I think. People, they like heroes, they like examples from history. And the saints present a lived argument for the credibility of the faith. Why become a Catholic? Well, there's only really one reason that makes sense to a lot of people. I will become a Catholic because Mother Teresa was a Catholic and she was a good thing. I will become a Catholic because St. Rita of Cascia was a Catholic and she was a good thing. And she speaks to me in my lived situation. So I think that's why the saints are very, very important. Now, one of the things is the church does not create saints. This is simply untrue. Rather, the realization that somebody is a saint emerges in the people of God and it drifts from below, it drifts up until eventually it gets to the top. And the Pope says, yes, we recognize that this person lived a life of heroic sanctity and therefore is a saint. And the Pope declares the person a saint, and they're added to the list of saints, the canon, hence the word canonization. And the word the Pope uses when he's reading out the decree that somebody is to be canonized as a saint, he uses the word discernimus. We see or we recognize. The Pope can't make anybody a saint. The Pope can only recognize that somebody is a saint. That's rather an important point. And of course, the discernment process of whether somebody is a saint is actually a long process. It starts with the people of God, then it's investigated by the diocese, then it's investigated by the universal church, and then eventually the Holy See decides. Because the Holy See is the highest court in the church. The Pope is the highest judge in the church. There's no higher judgment than that of the Pope. That's why, of course, you may remember when the late Holy Father died, he was just about to recognize a new saint, rather, the Sunday after he died. And of course, he couldn't because there was no Pope. Therefore, there was no canonization. And the blessed Carlo Acutis has to wait until Pope Leo is able to canonize him. And the same goes for quite a few others. So the whole thing stops when the Pope dies, starts again when a new Pope is elected. Now, this idea of the devotion coming from below let's have an example, because as I said, it's best to have a concrete example. One such example is Saint Therese of Lisieux, who is the most popular saint of the 20th century. More churches dedicated to Saint Therese of Lisieux than any other saint in the whole 20th century, new churches, that is to say. She, at the behest of her superiors, wrote a spiritual autobiography. After she was dead, and she was only 23 or whatever when she died, the Mother Superior of the Carmel of Lisieux published this journal of a, what's it called? Journal of a Soul? Autobiography of a Soul. So it was published. And it became an instant bestseller. Well, a slow burn bestseller, maybe. And it became very, very popular. I think St. Therese died in the 1890s. Anyway, then the next big step up for St. Therese was in 1914, the men of France all went to war, and the women of France stayed behind and prayed for them and worried about them. But before they went off to war, they gave them all a holy picture to take into battle to protect them. And the holy picture was generally of Thérèse of Lisieux. After that, the survivors of the war, most of them, and the slaughter of the war was appalling, the survivors of the war attributed their survival to Saint Therese of Lisieux, so there was absolutely no stopping her then, and she was canonized shortly afterwards. So you see how it works. One of the things about this is it's always political. Some people say, oh, this is political. Well, actually, it's always political. Karl Marx was right about that. It always is political. The army in France was highly Catholic. The state in France was very anti-Catholic at that time. And the army and the state didn't really get on very well. But of course, when the Germans invaded, the state had to sort of, call on the army. Who else? So it was, if you like, the army of France and the people in the army expressing their Catholicism, which the state had very much downgraded and tried to suppress. Now, also during the war rose to fame two other saints, one who was rather old, Joan of Arc, a warrior saint. Therese of Lisieux never saw a shot fired in anger, after all, so, but Joan of Arc was a warrior saint. She became very popular in the war. And then, of course, the other person who became extremely popular in the war was St. Martin of Tours, and who actually lived in the 5th century, don't forget, so an awful long time ago. But the war ended on the feast of St. Martin of Tours, and that was considered highly important. And so and St. Martin of Tours had been a soldier, you see, before he'd become a bishop. So these three are the military saints of France. And France, after the war, had a bit of a Catholic revival, and that was part of the Catholic revival. And of course, the anti-clericals in France had a bit of a decline after the war. Now, again, if you think about why is St. George so popular in England? Well, some of you will say, no, he's not, but he is really. But St. George was also a soldier saint, and he was the saint who protected the army of the Crusaders. And because his shrine is in Palestine, it's the place called Lydda, or Lod, which is right next door to Ben Gurion Airport in modern Israel. And therefore, these people prayed at the sign of St. George, and then they went on to fight the infidel. And when they came back, they brought the devotion to St. George with them, and not just to England, but to about a dozen other countries as well. He's even got a country named after him, Georgia, hasn't he? Now, why also, but there are more reasons why St. Therese is so popular. As you know, the unique selling point of St. Therese, of her spiritual autobiography, is this, that whatever you do, however small it is, you can do it for the glory of God. So if you're doing the washing up, and you do the washing up with a good will and with total devotion to the task in hand for the glory of God, you will be serving the Lord. That I think, am I summing up St. Therese of Lisieux correctly? Good. This is incredibly important because it fits with the age of St. Therese, which was where people were now living in an industrial society linked to mass production, where everybody felt, to their horror, they were just cogs in the machine. Well, you are a cog in the machine, but even if you're a cog in the machine, if you do your humble task as a cog in the machine, and you do it with a good will for the glory of God, your life will become beautiful. So Saint Therese is, even though, of course, she never visited the factory in her life, she is the patron saint of the industrialized person and the urban person and the person who is just a person in a large society. I think that's part of it. So that's why she was so popular. Now, let's go on to another saint. And the one I'm obviously going to choose is another Therese, Teresa of Calcutta. Why? How did she become so famous and so important? When I was a little boy, we had some lessons at school about Mother Teresa. She became very important and famous in about 1968 or 69 when Malcolm Muggeridge went out and made a television program about Mother Teresa's Home for the Dying in Calcutta. And this brought her international fame. She didn't ask for it, but it brought her international fame. She was just a nun doing good works in Calcutta, but rather extraordinary good works, and everybody paid attention all of a sudden. Much later, the anti-Muggeridge came along, namely Christopher Hitchens, and tried to destroy her reputation, but failed to destroy her reputation. In many ways, just made people realize how important she was if somebody as important as Christopher Hitchens could take time out to attack her. Christopher Hitchens says religion poisons everything. Not that Christopher Hitchens ever really gave any evidence for that view. And therefore, it was very brave of him to to attack the enemy at its strongest point rather than its weakest point, because Mother Teresa, I think, was the strongest point. It's also possibly a tactical error. Now, you do remember what Mother Teresa used to say, and it used to be written up on all sorts of posters of her. It was, do something beautiful for God, which is extraordinarily profound. Who on earth are you to do anything for the Almighty and the All-Powerful? Well, you can do something for God. God needs your help. Do something beautiful for God. Who are you, sinner that you are, etc., that you can do anything beautiful? Who are you who live in an ugly world who can do anything beautiful? But do something beautiful for God is true. You can do something beautiful for God. And Mother Teresa went to Calcutta, which is hell on earth. Calcutta, during the time of the British, had a really bad reputation. I remember people saying to us, oh gosh, it was awful. The stink. You'd have to go around holding a handkerchief in front of you and so on. It's full of people, massive. And they would pick people dying off the streets because there were so many people who were just unloved. And this is true, incidentally, of another place, Lagos. Every night, I think, the police pick up 30 unidentified corpses off the streets of Lagos, I was once told, who are never claimed. Quite extraordinary, isn't it? Anyway, one of the things that Mother Teresa was doing, she was making a difference. She was responding to the awareness we now have, thanks to the television age, of the misery of the third world and the problem of poverty there, and also, because it gets better, in our own society. Because Mother Teresa also opened convents in, for example, London, in Rome, where the nuns would work with the very poor people in London and in Rome. And Mother Teresa did say that the poverty you get in Calcutta is one thing, but the poverty you get in London is even worse because it is a spiritual poverty. So she challenged us. She said, you're the richest country on earth, and yet there are so many unloved people in your midst. And she was right about that. And of course, she was pretty tough, Mother Teresa. But the only person who ever gave her the brush off was another woman who was even tougher, Margaret Thatcher. Mother Teresa was received by Mrs. Thatcher, and she said, people said to her, what are you going to say to Mrs. Thatcher? She said, well, I'm going to speak to her about poverty and this, that, particularly I'm going to speak to her about abortion. And people said, what do you think Mrs. Thatcher will say? She said, Mrs. Thatcher will listen to me because she is a mother. But of course, Mrs. Thatcher chose not to listen to Mother Teresa. That was a time when Mother Teresa went to Cardboard City, if you know where Cardboard City was. Does anybody know where Cardboard City is? No, you do, because you're... Yes, it's no longer there. Yeah, it's now where the IMAX cinema is. Well, that was, and she said how awful it was. People were living in cardboard boxes, which were like coffins, she said. And, she said, this is terrible. But Mrs. Thatcher gave her the brush off. Mrs. Thatcher, of course, was quite. I mean, I knew people who knew Mrs. Thatcher, and they all said the same thing. She had idée fixe. Mrs. Thatcher, I think, basically, Mrs. Thatcher being the daughter of Alderman Roberts, I don't think she really had much time for Catholics or indeed nuns. So there you are. So Mother Teresa met her match. Let's hope Mrs. Thatcher later saw that Mother Teresa was right all along. Spiritual poverty is the worst. The saints are there to make us uncomfortable. That's a big point. They're not there to make you feel good about yourself. They're there to make you feel uncomfortable. And Cardboard City is now gone. But, I mean, there are lots of what the Americans call derelicts still in London, down and outs in London. And of course, it is spiritual poverty. It's because we're the richest country on earth. It is spiritual poverty. How many homeless people do you see in the People's Republic of China? None.
They kicked them out.
Oh, right, they kicked them out. How did they lock them up or what?
They just kicked them out of the city.
Ah, yes, okay. Yeah, okay, right. Fair enough, yeah. Well, that's not exactly compassionate, is it? I mean, in South Africa, when the former regime was in power, you didn't see the slums because along the roads, people would build slums. So they'd build a sort of a large bank. So when you're driving along, you couldn't see the slums. So it's out of mind, you can't see it, therefore it's not really a thing. But, we need to think about poverty. How many of you spend all your time thinking about poverty? Apart from your own poverty. Your own poverty. Every time you look in your bank account, you think, oh no, how are we going to make it till next month? I mean, we might think that. That's not actually poverty. Lack of cash is not poverty. It's much, much more than lack of cash. Lack of cash isn't the cause of poverty. Lack of cash is the symptom of poverty, I would say. The reason you don't have any cash is because you're poor. It's not you don't have any cash, therefore you're poor. It's a lack of opportunity, lack of education, lack of ability to relate to other people, lack of all those sort of things, and spiritual poverty, lack of ambition, lack of sense of purpose in life, lack of faith, and so on. So, dear Mother Teresa, how right she was. And, I think people will remember Mother Teresa is incredibly important, it seems to me. And the amazing thing about Mother Teresa, I was in Kosovo. Has anybody been to Kosovo? No. You should go, it's lovely. I was in Kosovo and they have these, you know what a tat shop is? It's a shop that sells Catholic stuff, like rosary beads, etc., etc., etc. That's called a tat shop. Oh, we've got one here, haven't we? Yeah. The tat, that's what they're called. Yeah, okay, repository. It's a tat shop. Yeah. And sometimes you could go to a Protestant tat shop, which is just books, which is a bit boring. And sometimes you go to an Orthodox tat shop, which is really it's icons, basically. You get them in Catholic tat shops. But what I discovered in Kosovo was Muslim tat shops. And they're aniconic. But you had sort of grandfather clocks, because everybody needs one. And you also had models of the Kaaba in Mecca. Oh, there was lovely diamante and black ebony and so on. And then you also had statues of Mother Teresa, because she was an Albanian. And in Kosovo, there were Albanians. And Mother Teresa is loved by the Muslims. I mean, Albania is culturally majority Muslim, but there are statues of Mother Teresa everywhere. And of course, the airport in Albania is called Mother Teresa International. She is loved. And so I think that is a real test of somebody when they go beyond the borders of their natural fan club, their natural audience. And so the Muslims love Mother Teresa as well, which I think is great. They don't love her because she's a Catholic. They love her because she's an Albanian. She is the most famous Albanian in the world, apart from Enver Hoxha, who was a mass murderer. So it's either her or him. So they chose her. I mean, poor old, yes, anyway. So that's Mother Teresa. What about St. Francis? So Francis also has a mass following outside the Catholic Church. A lot of Anglicans were keen on Pope St. Francis at one stage. And also, quite a lot of Russians were keen on Pope Francis at one stage. I met some Romanians, and they'd called their son Francis. And I said, "Why have you called him Francis?" They said, "We like Pope St. Francis." And I said, "Oh, that's good, but you're Orthodox." And they said, "Oh, yes, but we still like St. Francis." So a lot of people find St. Francis really important. That wonderful film by Zeffirelli, Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon, had a universal appeal. St. Francis is incredibly important. What's so important about St. Francis is, first of all, he believed in converting the infidel. That's rather important. People have brushed that under the carpet. And secondly, he was an ecstatic. He went into visions and went into ecstasy and prayed for hours and so on, and received the stigmata. And the other thing about him is he was a penitent. He spent a lot of his time in caves praying and starving himself. And when he died, recently they looked at his bones and he was severely undernourished. And he died quite young, and he was sort of more or less blind and couldn't walk and so on. So because he really did overdo the penance. And so everybody, the world took its revenge on St. Francis by saying he was sweet and cuddly and he loved animals. Well, he did like animals, but the fact he was certainly not sweet and he's certainly not cuddly. So they've tried to neuter St. Francis but he was in fact a man of great fervour. And of course, you remember the key phrase of St. Francis. Most saints have got a key phrase attached to them, a sort of a slogan. Some Mother Teresa, do something beautiful for God. And St. Francis is, "Francis, rebuild my house." That is the key phrase of St. Francis. And you remember the Pope was in bed in the Lateran Palace, and he woke up in the morning and he said, I've had this dream. The church was falling down. Every Pope probably has that dream every night. And he said, but this time it was different. He said, and this little brother came and he held it up. The Lateran Basilica was collapsing, and this little brother came and he held it up. And then he said, and they said, well, we've got the list of people who need to see you today. And he said, okay, right, send them in. And then the sort of number 16th on the list was this guy, and he saw the man of his dreams. So that is what St. Francis, the man who rebuilds the church. Not rebuilds the church, because only God builds the church. The man who, Francis rebuilt my house. And that's what he did at San Damiano, quite literally. But that's also what he did. Because, of course, St. Francis represented a very popular movement, a mass popular movement, which, of course, later was institutionalized and lost some of its fervour. But, the popular movement is still there. St. Francis, terribly, terribly important. We've got to get back to St. Francis. We've got to recover the ecstasy of St. Francis, the penance of St. Francis, the fervour of St. Francis, and the the desire to rebuild the house of God of St. Francis, and also the desire to convert the infidel, by the way. Okay, so no pressure. Okay, just work on that for next week. He never wrote that. No, the prayer of St. Francis, yeah, everybody loves it, but again, that's a neutering of St. Francis. Make me a channel of your peace. What happened was, it's a rather funny story. Again, go back to France, 1917. There was some Catholic magazine which was for soldiers, which is interesting, you see, because the church, the French army didn't have chaplains, I don't think, because the state wouldn't allow it. But they had these, they would have had priests who looked after them and so on, but they had this magazine, and it had a picture of St. Francis on the page, and next to it, a prayer that some priest had written, which was, make me a channel of your peace. And because it was a picture of St. Francis next to it, everybody said, oh, this is the prayer of St. Francis. No, it's not. It's a prayer, more accurately, you say, a prayer associated with St. Francis. Associated with St. by accident and in error. Oh no! Oh dear, it's probably wrecked. Are they still together? Are they still together? Oh no! Oh no! The bad fairy. Oh yeah. Anyway, maybe. Anyway, but the real prayer of St. Francis is, "Oh God, hear truly what? What's the matter? Hear truly." Yes, here truly present and in all your churches by your holy cross you have redeemed the world. I put it in the newsletter the other day. Anyway, good. Okay, now that is St. Francis. Now, finally, or quite semi-finally, who is the most important of saints? Well, the most important saint of the world is obviously the Blessed Virgin Mary. It goes without saying. And the thing about the Blessed Virgin Mary is a lot of people say, oh, we are talking too much about the Blessed Virgin Mary. You're talking too much. Oh, no. We don't want to hear about this. The church goes on too much about the Blessed Virgin Mary. Do you think that's the case? No, great. Because you do get a lot of people, and you also get a lot of pushback from Protestants saying, oh, the Catholics, that's all they talk about, the Virgin Mary. My answer to that is no, the church does not talk about the Blessed Virgin Mary enough. And the church needs to talk about the Blessed Virgin Mary more than it does at present. And also, and why this is so important, it seems to me, why is it so important? Because it's just so obvious. But I think what is the key event in the 19th century, the key Catholic event in the 19th century, it's the appearances in Lourdes, which was, I think, 1852, wasn't it? 1852. The appearance of Our Blessed Lady to Bernadette in Lourdes. This is the key event of the 19th century. And don't forget, France, much more than Italy, is the most important Catholic country. The battle over Catholicism has been fought in France and been won in France. People thought it had been lost in France, but in fact been won in France. And 1852, Catholicism was the state religion in France because in those happy days, France was under the rule of the Emperor Napoleon III, and Napoleon III was an atheist, if truth be told, but his wife, who was a very nice person, was a devout Catholic, and therefore the church was in the ascendance in France, having had a rather tough time under the Louis Philippe and so on, and then, of course, after 1870, having a dreadful time. In 1848, they'd murdered the Archbishop of Paris, hadn't they? They did it again in 1870. It was a different archbishop. But two archbishops of Paris were murdered by the mob, one in 1848, one in 1870. But it was a period of calm during the time of Napoleon III. But Napoleon III was a guy who'd written two books when he had been in exile and in jail and things like that. One was called, I think, The Bonapartist Ideal or something. Another one was called The Abolition of Poverty, which is a very ambitious title for a book, because Jesus Christ himself said, the poor you will have with you always. Nobody's going to abolish poverty. And so he was very, very keen on the abolition of poverty and looking after the working classes. Saint Bernadette was not a member of the working class. She was a daughter of an unemployed miller. She was one of those people who'd fallen off the social system. She was part of what we'd call nowadays the underclass. She was malnourished. She was ignorant. She was living on the very edge of France. She couldn't speak French, proper French. It was much later that Napoleon decreed everybody had to speak French and that nobody was allowed to speak these silly dialects that she spoke. And they lived in a slum, the most appalling slum. If you go there, it's smaller than this room. And this was the person that the Blessed Virgin Mary chose to speak to. This is, I think, extraordinary, that when God's Holy Mother decides that she has a message for humanity, she sends that message to humanity through the most unlikely, via the most unlikely messenger. And that's terribly, terribly important. And what did she say to Bernadette? The key thing is pray for sinners. The Blessed Virgin Mary is always asking us to pray for sinners. Pray for us sinners now and the hour of our death. Amen. The Blessed Virgin Mary wants the reconciliation of the world with her Son. The message of Lourdes is incredibly profound and very, very simple. And of course, the other message was look after the sick. Care for the sick. Now, then, of course, almost immediately, the pilgrimages of the sick started going to Lourdes, and all the lefties and communists went berserk because they said, this is disgraceful. This is the Catholics being nice to unfortunate people, when we all know that the Catholics hate the unfortunate because all they care about is themselves. They're very, very selfish. And so they hated Lourdes. And of course, Lourdes became the number one spot for all the Catholics of France, particularly the military and also the aristocracy of France, and all those who were against the things like the communards and all those sort of people. And it became a bit of a flashpoint. But the politicization of Lourdes was not the fault of the Catholics, it was the fault of the anti-Catholics, because they really objected to Catholics being nice to people, because that didn't fit with their anti-clerical playbook, which was Catholics are oppressors. And here at Lourdes, you had the exact opposite. The oppressed were being set free. Now, I have a friend called Michael Arditi who wrote a book about Lourdes, which is called Jubilate. It's very, very good. And in it, this woman arrives in Lourdes with her handicapped husband, and she sees that the airport in Lourdes is completely adapted for the handicapped. That, there's none of this nonsense. So if you're in a wheelchair, you have to take the wall. No, if you're in a wheelchair, it's fine. And she says, why can't the whole world be like Lourdes? And that is, Lourdes is a microcosm of the church. The Blessed Virgin Mary is the mother of the church, and in Lourdes, she has given us a picture of what the church should be, and she's given us the opportunity to be the church we should be. Lourdes is full of people doing Catholic stuff. And that's helping sick people. That's all you've got to do, to be a Catholic. Help sick people. If you can do that, you're on your way. Remember what Chaucer said about all the clergy in the Canterbury Tales. He said the nun, she had rosary beads with gold on and coral, and she was awful. And the monk, he had nice soft shoes. He was ghastly. And what does he? Then he has his ideal priest, the parson. And what does he say about him? Very little. It just says he would walk many miles to visit his parishioners when they were sick. It's the only thing he says about him. He doesn't say he was very clever or he said Mass beautifully and so on. That the visiting of the sick is the only thing that is attributed to the parson, who is the perfect clergyman. It's amazing that. So if you want to be a perfect Catholic, just go and visit the sick, and the rest will follow. And so that, I think, and again, Lourdes took place at a time of rapid industrialization, where people were again reduced to being cogs in the machine. And the opposite, the message of Lourdes is you're not a cog in the machine, you're a person. And even though you might be terribly unwell and about to breathe your last, you are the most important person in the room. That's so important. And this is not me telling you in theory. This is happening, and you can see it in front of your eyes. Who's been to Lourdes here? Ooh, ooh, ooh. 1, 2, 3. No. Am I right?
Yes, for a long time I went to manage a child, but it was very obvious from what goes on.
Yeah. I went when I was about 20-something. I'm going to go back when I'm 70. Oh, God, that's not far off. Oh dear. Oh God, I better book my ticket. It's just wonderful. Lourdes is wonderful. Lourdes is, you don't need to be told. You see it in front of your eyes. Now, if you want to say, what's the point of the saints? They don't tell you stuff. They show you stuff. Now, I now talk about those two saints, and then I'll stop. I'll talk about those two saints that the Pope will canonize this year, hopefully, the Blessed Carlo Acutis and the Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati. As you know, Pier Giorgio Frassati came from a very rich family in Turin. He lived in the 1930s. He was very opposed to Mussolini. He spent all his time looking after poor people. And when he wasn't doing that, he was climbing mountains and walking in the Alps with a bunch of friends talking about God. And you've seen the photographs of him where he's wearing this mountaineering gear, which I think is interesting. I think Pier Giorgio will be a very famous saint. He'll be a very, very important saint of the church, along with those other saints from Turin. You've got Don Bosco, who's the most important saint in the Catholic Church after Pope Saint Francis, and you've also got Dominic Savio, and you've also got the chief the collaborator of Don Bosco, who founded the nuns, whose name escapes me. And you've also got the Our Lady of Consolation, and you've got the Sacred Shroud, the Holy Shroud, and so on. Turin is one of those places, and Turin, of course, is one of the cradles of the Industrial Revolution. It's the home of Fiat. So the fact that you can be industrial and Catholic at the same time is really very good news. The other person, of course, who the Pope will canonize is the Blessed Carlo Acutis. We have a photograph of him outside. One of the things I've spoken many times about the Blessed Carlo, so I won't speak at length now. What I will say is this. The icons we have of the Blessed Carlo, icon just means picture, are pictures his mother and father took of their son, who was their pride and joy, who died aged 15 and a half. And so what you see when you see the holy picture of the Blessed Carlo, you see a ordinary teenage boy. That's all. That's the holy picture. That's it. But what has happened is the family snapshot of the ordinary teenage boy has become a holy picture, has become a religious icon, because the Blessed Carlo shows us that anybody, whether a teenage boy or not a teenage boy, can make their life holy. So that it's showing us the extraordinariness of the ordinary, the holiness of the secular. This idea that the secular and the sacred are separate is, of course, a heresy. The secular and the sacred are always found together. Now, so I think the Blessed Carlo and the Blessed Pier Giorgio, when they are saints, they will be as important as Saint Teresa of Lisieux and maybe Saint Teresa of Calcutta. And then finally, we've got Saint Rita. Now, Saint Rita died an awful long time ago, 13 something, or 11 something, or 12 something. I mean, so long ago. And if you go and see her body, it's showing a bit wear and tear, frankly. I mean, she's been dead 800 years. She's great for somebody who's been dead 800 years. But she's been dead 800 years. She only became a saint in 1900, made a saint by no less a person than Pope Leo XIII. And she has become one of the most popular saints in the Catholic Church. Now that the Pope is an Augustinian, and the Augustinian order has dedicated itself to spreading the news about Saint Rita, we will be hearing a lot more about Saint Rita of Cascia. A lot more. Saint Rita of Cascia was, of course, it's very interesting. A well-known Catholic on Facebook said she didn't agree with the cult of Saint Rita of Cascia at all, because Saint Rita of Cascia was an abused woman. And by encouraging devotion to Saint Rita of Cascia and her patience, are we saying that women who are abused must put up with it? No, we're not saying that. What we are saying is that you overcome hatred with love. That is what we're saying. And Saint Rita had a tough life, married off age 12, etc. Married to a brute, mother of 2 more brutes. You know, it's awful. When you have children who look like your husband, you think, oh no. Oh no. This is terrible. I should never have got married. I didn't have a choice. Yeah, I was forced into it at age 12. You know, and yet she did what Saint Teresa of Calcutta did, produce something beautiful for God. So, and I went to Saint Rita's shrine when I was in Umbria, and I was all on my own, I seem to remember. I don't know how I got there. And it was raining, and there was COVID, and there was nobody there. It was just me and Saint Rita. And it's many people say, oh, it's so ugly because it's modern, you see, because it was only a little church there, and in the 1920s they built it. It's Neo-Byzantine, and it just says above the door something Saint Rita of Cascia, Vas Amoris. Now you know what Vas Amoris means. Now, vas is either translated into English as vase or vat. Amoris is of love. So saint or vase or vase or vase or vat or vessel of love. In other words, a vessel is something that's filled from outside. So Saint Rita of Cascia was the vessel of love, filled with the love of God. And I just thought that was an extremely profound designation of Saint Rita of Cascia, and indeed of all the saints. I've talked for 39 minutes. Have you got any points?
I just wanted to ask you more about Teresa
of
Lisieux.
Of Lisieux, yeah.
Because I think I know a lot about her, and I never really knew much about her at all. And I still don't really know what she did.
Nothing. She did nothing.
Oh.
She did nothing. She did nothing. She did nothing. Because she wrote this book, and she was just an ordinary nun, but she wrote this book, and the book then took off. And the book was a book of spirituality, essentially, which is saying basically turn everything in your life into a means of sanctification. So the book, I mean, you can buy it on the internet, The Autobiography of a Soul. And that's what made her, that's what propelled her to international stardom.
But she didn't necessarily do anything safe.
No, she didn't do it. Well, yeah, I mean, she did everything she did perfectly, or as perfectly as she could. That is enough to make you a saint. Now, the really good thing about this is this idea that you all have to go off and work in a leper colony in Africa. You don't. You can just do it at home. That's the whole point. Hence, she's the saint for the industrial age.
Something of the victories. And if you go in, it's full of thanks to St. Teresa.
Yes,
for all the soldiers.
Yes.
Coming in.
Yes. Yes.
Absolutely full.
Yes. 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 There was
Lady of the Victories.
Our Lady of Victories. Yes. Yeah. There was. I once went into a little church in a mountain in the Vosges in eastern France, which of course had been annexed to the Reich by Hitler, and the young men from there had been dragooned into the German army and sent to fight in Russia. And it just said, Grâce à Notre-Dame de whatever, and they just said, Russie, Russia, 1944. You know, thanks be, because it was a miracle of Our Lady that anybody came back from Russia. And you see these ex-votos, they're called, all over the place. They're wonderful, these ex-votos. I love them. They're not very popular now. They don't allow them. A lot of churches don't allow them. But after the war, there were millions and millions of ex-votos everywhere. You know, because surviving the war was a miracle. Surviving the Russian front was a miracle. Anything else? Yes.
I know you said that that people need a sort of modern example of living, etc.
Yes.
But do you think that because so many people are made saints, it somehow dilutes?
That's what a lot of people said in the time of JP2, that, oh my goodness, here we go again. And we've just haven't we got enough saints already? Aren't we flooding the market? One of the answers that was given in the time of JP2, I don't think JP2 gave an answer, but people gave an answer, was that, of course, it's all very well saying that, but you've got to understand, for example, I'll give one example. There wasn't, until very recently, a single Maltese saint. Even though the Maltese are fervent Catholics. The only Maltese saint is St. Publius, who was a Roman, the one who entertained St. Paul. They are not a single Maltese saint.
It's not be about the people who perform miracles and who've lived. Doesn't matter in a way where
Well, well, I think it's the idea being that if there was not a single Maltese saint, therefore you were being left out. You felt a bit left out. I mean, there have always been English saints, but there hasn't been an English saint. Well, Cardinal Newman was canonized, and it was thought.
Carlo was born in London.
Yes, that's true. But Cardinal Newman was canonized, but he was the first English saint since St. John Fisher and St. Thomas More. No, there's nobody since. Yes, it could look like that. I don't know. But one of the things is, of course, the reason that this is why we've got to go back to what I said at the beginning. The reason people are saints is because the discernment that they are saints emerges at ground level. And I think there have been a few examples where some saints have been sort of parachuted in. That's not desirable.
And so is there a sort of checklist? So do you have to...
Oh, yes. The checklist says you're supposed to have to be worthy of imitation. So that has actually knocked out Isabella the Catholic from consideration. Isabella the Catholic was the one who sent Columbus to the New World. And she said Columbus to the New World. Everyone said, well, for goodness sake, this is not a good investment. There is no New World. But she said, well, there may be souls out there which need to be converted to the Catholic Church. So the fact that America is Christian is down to her. But she was also the one who expelled the Jews from Spain. And therefore, we cannot say she is worthy of imitation. And Isabella the Catholic, many people have tried to, she was very devout. Many people have tried to have her canonized, but it's always founded on that. The other thing, so heroic sanctity, worthy of imitation, and 2 miracles after you're dead. You don't, after you're dead, through your intercession. The Blessed Carlo cured somebody in Brazil, a little boy in Brazil, and he's cured somebody else, and so on and so forth. And a lot of people have been cured by, there are cures, they do happen, there are miracles. But that is the checklist. But the other thing is, the other checklist is expedite or non-expedite. Is it expeditious or is it not expeditious? Is this the right time? Is it wise? Are there going to be unforeseen circumstances? I mean, one of the things is, for example, if we'd made Isabella the Catholic a saint, we would have wrecked relations with our Jewish brethren forever. Again, Queen Mary, I mean, she was a really good person, but she did burn 300 Protestants, and we can't make her a saint because I think that would be a real, lead balloon going down in the General Synod of the Church of England.
Obviously, then people will be able to go through people's Twitter accounts and things. They've got things they said at 17 that are no longer, past the, so they'll be able to.
Well, I know. You must cancel your Twitter account before you die or something. But one of the things they do is if you leave a body of writings, they go through your writings with a very fine tooth comb, and they don't find anything in your writings that knocks you out. Now, the servant of God, or is he the venerable, Salvo d'Acquisto, was an Italian policeman who, when the Germans wanted to shoot dead a whole village for planting a bomb, said that he did it, so he was shot dead and the villagers were spared. And greater love than this hath no man, that he gives up his life for his friends. He was about 23. And of course, one of the things is, I met his brother, and I also met some of the people he saved, actually. I wrote an article for the Catholic Herald some years ago about him. The Blessed Salvo d'Acquisto, they went through all his exercise books from his school days, which his mother had kept, and they found in one, he was sent to Libya to be a policeman in Libya in the war, 1943 or 1942, 1941. And he said, I can't wait to get face to face with l'odiato nemico, the hated enemy. Now, l'odiato nemico, the hated enemy, was a phrase that the then government of Italy used about the British. And some people said, well, we can't possibly make this guy a saint if he hated people, which is true. But then they said, oh, well, no, he was just using a phrase that was in general parlance, which doesn't actually count. It doesn't actually mean he hated the British at all. He never saw action anyway. So you have to go through, and there have been the people whose sainthood has been very controversial because of what they wrote and so on and so forth. Pius IX was made a saint. Pius IX signed off death warrants, but he's still being made a saint. They haven't used that to sort of say, oh, no, because don't forget, everybody signed off death warrants. St. Louis condemned people to death and so on. And St. Edward the Confessor condemned people to death. So, we don't, that's what they did in those days.
Nominated saint, like if you take someone in your family.
If they're dead, yeah.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, it does happen. There are one or two people who. This is one of the reasons why there's so many Italian saints. Because the Italians are more keen on doing this than anybody else, and therefore they push saints. So, for example, the Blessed Salvo d'Acquisto, who's been on the books for some time now, he's been pushed by the Franciscans of Naples, the people of Naples. Wherever you go in Italy, there's a Salvo d'Acquisto street or a Salvo d'Acquisto square, and of course he's an Italian national hero. And I don't know if you know this, it's going to go on the internet, maybe I shouldn't say this, but Italian national heroes from the Second World War are remarkably few and far between, aren't they? So that's why they really like him. You see, he's the only Italian from the Second World War who, just gets admiration. Mussolini, not so much. All those other people, not so much. But and therefore, for the Italians, having a saint in the family is a very important thing. Having a saint from your village is a very important thing, or your town or your province or something like that. It's a very important thing. So anybody can become a saint, absolutely. Then John Brayburn, who was this guy who lived as a hermit in Zimbabwe, I think he is. There is a movement to have him canonized as well. I think with Cardinal Newman, there wasn't much of a popular movement to have Cardinal Newman canonized. I don't think there was much of a popular movement. Popular movements, I mean, one of the most popular movements to have somebody canonized, obviously Saint Rita of Cascia, which was slow burn. It's 800 years it took. But Saint Rita of Cascia is adored. Oh, it's quite. Do you think, as an Italian, you adore Saint Rita of Cascia?
Well, I do know that in a lot of villages try and own her.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
The other saint, of course, that the Italians love and everybody else loves, and probably the most important saint of our time in many ways, I haven't mentioned this, Saint Pius of Pietrelcina, aka Padre Pio. Padre Pio is incredible. Padre Pio is incredible. Now, there was a woman on television, I've said this many a time, and she said, she was talking about Padre Pio. She knew him well. She was a journalist. She said, Il padre era brusco fino al punto di essere scarbato. The father was brusque to the point of being downright rude. Didn't like fools. I like Padre Pio for that reason. And the other thing about Padre Pio, the other thing about Padre Pio that was remarkable, well, there were many things about it. Yes, I know somebody who went to confession to Padre Pio, who's now dead. And I said, what was it like going to confession to Padre Pio? He said, it was just like going to confession to any other priest. And so I say to people, go to confession, and wherever you go, you'll have a priest who's just like Padre Pio. You don't need it, but Padre Pio is extraordinary. And I'll tell you another thing. I was in a market in Italy, and above the cash desk in every Italian thing, you have a crucifix of the Holy Picture. And these were Muslims, I thought, and they had a picture of Padre Pio. It's good. So he goes beyond. He goes beyond. Padre Pio is adored. Now, I think this is the key thing. In fact, we better close shortly, but I think this is the key thing. You're actually meant to love the saints. You're not just meant to admire them. You're meant to love the saints. Admiration is a form of love. It's not like, and I think, this is the unique selling point of Catholicism. We propose people for you to love. I don't think you can really love Cardinal Newman very much. You can admire Cardinal Newman, I suppose, but Cardinal Newman's not particularly lovable. Whereas, of course, if you think about the great heroes of the Quakers or the Anglicans, Elizabeth Fry, well, she was very admirable, wasn't she? But I don't think anybody really loved her, even when she was, well, I don't know. I don't love Elizabeth Fry. I think she's a really good thing. The guys the Wilberforces who campaigned against slavery, we don't really love them, do we? They were great. Yeah, they were great. Yeah, why don't we know them? It's because we think of their ideas. With the saints, they were hands-on, I think. We love Padre Pio, even though he was brusque to the point of being downright rude.
We have someone in this parish who went to confession.
Oh.
Well, Miss Capaldi.
She was a Capaldi.
Miss Capaldi went on a tour, and I know her very well. And I asked her, yes, she did.
And is she happily still with us?
No.
Oh, right, okay. No. He died at 63 years.
She's still with us.
Okay. Was Miss Capaldi from Piccinisco?
Initially. Well, her father, mother.
She's a relation of the famous comic Peter Capaldi from Scotland and Piccinisco. I think all Capaldis are from Piccinisco, a village that has given so much to the world, I think you'll agree. Tiny village of about 5 people in the middle of nowhere. Are you from Piccinisco?
Yeah.
It's tiny. I've been there.
Yeah, it's lovely.
Yeah. And
Miss Capaldi was very active here.
Oh, good.
Oh, she was.
Well, she brought a touch of Padre Pio to our parish. I mean, Padre Pio, you can't really, Padre Pio, if you say to people, well, why are you going all this way to, where's that place? San Giovanni Rotondo. Why are you going there? And they say, well, we love Padre Pio. It's as simple as that. Or we're going because we think he's a really great blah, blah. No. It's love. I think you've got to cut to the chase. Love is the only thing that binds people. to each other and indeed to the church. And the people in the church are meant to love each other, and therefore it's easy to love the saints because they're lovable, whereas some of the people around us, not so much. But the saints are lovable. Okay, any other questions? Have you all got a favourite saint? Who?
It's Michael.
The Archangel, defends the day of battle. Yeah?
Saint Anthony.
Of Padua. He's coming up next week. Saint Philomena, who, yes, okay.
Padre Pio.
Oh, Padre Pio. Padre Pio. Ignatius of Loyola. Ignatius of Antioch.
St. Clement.
Saint Clement. Saint Clement, yeah? Any saints? Maximilian Kolbe, who is very similar to, or Father Salvo d'Acquisto, very similar to Maximilian Kolbe. Yeah. Hi. Anyway, we're just about to end, I think. So then, Maximilian Kolbe is had a little bit of a wobble in his path to canonization because, of course, they looked at his writings, and some of his writings could have been interpreted as anti-Semitic. In Poland in the 1930s, there was a lot of anti-Semitism but he got off the charge. And he was on the grounds that he wasn't anti-racist, he was against the Jewish religion, as opposed to against Jewish people.
I thought he was initially.
No, I don't think so. Maybe he was. Yeah, maybe, because don't forget, in Poland in those days, something like 20% of the population was Jewish, so there were quite a lot of converts and so on and so forth. Okay, right, any other points? No. Well, we will end there. Good night, everybody. Lovely to see you. Bye.